I got to do this. It's good for me to do this once in a while so I remember how preaching in the pulpit. I've got asked to preach at a service for the diocese on Friday, installation of a rector who's a friend of mine in Corpus, and they want me to preach from the pulpit. I had to think for a second. Can I still do that? I don't know. So I want to try it here. Not that I would do it every week, but just to make sure I still can. And I remember a long time ago when I was a new priest, someone said, for annual meeting weeks, when I would say things like as the leader of the church, it looks so much more official when you're in the pulpit doing that. So I'm going for officialness too, as well. Two things. Okay, so one of the secrets that you know is that I like to have the meeting this Sunday or talk about the state of the church this Sunday because there's no football. That's a one that I own, right? I like football, so when the playoffs are on, this is a good lull. It's a good Sunday to do that. Another reason that you might not know is because it's a built-in excuse for me to never have to run in the Harlingen Marathon, which I will never do. But I can't, right? Because we have this. And then the third is that this is actually when I started at St. Albans. This first Sunday in February was my first week here 5 years ago, right? So it's kind of a nice, thank you. So it's kind of a nice way for me to tell time, right? This is like a marker for me to remember how long it's been. In some ways, 5 years, it seems like longer, and in some ways it doesn't. But we're still good. We're still good. Still feel fresh, just like we're just getting started. So I want to start with a couple thank yous. I don't normally do this because it's important to preach the gospel. People come to church to hear the gospel. The gospel is what changes hearts. It's what saves lives. It's where the power of the church is. But once in a while, it's important to kind of talk about where we are. So once a year, that's what I like to do from this space. And guess what? You're in luck. Today's the day. So 4 thank yous. First, to my wife. I had a mentor that was an older priest, and he always said, think about your wife. He said his wife's name was Dee. And he said, everyone else gets a priest. Poor Dee is just stuck with the husband. And that's the truth, right? Everyone else gets a priest. Poor Dee was stuck with a husband. And I would say the same thing about Sarah. Everyone else gets a priest, and Sarah gets a husband with all the husband stuff that comes with it. So I couldn't do this without her. I wouldn't have even been in this position without her. She's been a part of our this journey with me from the very beginning. From discernment to seminary to ordination, Louisiana, Wyoming here. So thank you, hon, for all your support. You're awesome. One day you'll get a priest somewhere, I promise, right? When I retire, maybe. The second is our staff. Our staff works super hard for you. They love this place. So, the office staff, our custodial staff, our music team, they work hard for you. Everybody that works here loves this place. And that's an important thing for me when we hire someone, that they love this place. You can't teach that. You can't, a lot of people can do a job, but not everybody can do it with love in their heart. So I'm thankful to our staff. I'm thankful to our vestry. Vestry does a lot of behind the scenes work that you don't often see. It's not, I don't know, can I say this in a sermon? It's not the sexiest job sometimes to be vestry. Those of you that have served know that, but every vestry has important responsibilities as they move the church forward in some way. And a lot of this year, our vestry spent working on facilities and, making sure that we were taking care of what we had. We had a lot of security conversations after the unfortunate, heartbreaking tragedy that happened in Uvalde in May. Right, we had to have conversations about security. But those aren't things that we preach about. We're not going to come to church and share, hey, this is what we talked about in vestry. But just know, behind the scenes, they work hard on those things to care for this place, to manage our finances properly, and to move the church forward as it needs to. Every vestry moves it forward in their year, in some way. And so a lot of deferred maintenance got taken care of this year. We replaced roofs, we replaced air conditioners. Our kind of unspoken goal on the vestry is one day we know we're going to need to build again, right? It's the history of St. Albans. It will happen. But what we don't want to do is have to build again because we haven't taken care of what we had. right? When that day comes, we want to do it because we're going to move this place forward, both the church and the school, not because we have roofs and air conditioners that we've neglected and ignored for 15 years, right? We're not going to do that. So that starts every year with the vestry being committed to taking care of this place. So just know behind the scenes, they work hard to do those types of things and make sure things are taken care of. The stuff you don't see, so that you could come and worship and not have to worry about that. And then, of course, I want to thank you because you're an easy congregation to be a priest for. You are. And so I hear for all the time from both your previous rectors, right, David Reed and Scott Brown, oh, those were the days, right? When they talk about being the priest at St. Albans, oh, those were the days. And I said, well, you can't have them back. Too bad. Those are my days now. They're not your days. But no, we talk frequently about just what a special congregation this is. And so thank you for your support, your love, your care, not only for me, but for Sarah, for Rosie, and just the way you come together to love and do what's best for St. Albans. I appreciate you. So thank you. Now, okay, on to some other parts this morning. One thing I want to do is tell the truth. And I think it's a very important responsibility of a leader to tell the truth. And so there's a few things about the church I want to tell you about and tell the truth. One of them is about the wider Episcopal Church. So we have some information since COVID to just get an idea of the state of the Episcopal Church throughout the country. How has the church fared since COVID? And we have numbers that tell us the average, right? Most churches are somewhere between 35 and 36% loss since COVID. Right? That's not great news. That's not what we want to hear. Now, I do want to tell you, there was no church that did better during COVID, right? Not the Catholic Church, not the Methodist Church, not Logos. No church did better during COVID. COVID was a time that affected every church of any denomination in the entire country. The Episcopal Church has maybe some issues that may have added to that, but it did not fare well, right? And so our diocese, I was hoping would fare a little better, but it didn't. Our diocese over that same span lost about 39%, which is staggering to think about in different churches throughout our diocese. A 39% drop from 2020 through 2022. Now, St. Albans, here's the good news, if you can call it good news. St. Albans fared better than both the diocese and the national church. It only lost 23%. So saying it only lost 23% is not something, if you're a business owner, you necessarily ever want to hear, right? As presented as good news, but in comparison to where all the other trends of churches were, St. Albans weathered the storm better and is in this small category of Episcopal churches. There's 12% of them that are showing year-over-year growth since COVID. So 12% of Episcopal churches showed growth from 2020, 2021, 2021, 2022. We're one of those 12%. We had 8% growth last year, 16% growth the year before coming out of the pandemic. So we're in this select company of churches that's not necessarily going in the way the trend is going. I just want you to know that. One important reason I want you to know that is because there's not an answer for what, the future of the church that we can just get from the diocese or from Michael Curry, right, or from headquarters. There's no answer from headquarters coming. A lot of times headquarters is looking to us to say, what are you doing? And so it's just important to know. I don't tell you that so that you get depressed by that information, but I want you to know the truth. There isn't a ready-made answer coming for what's the future of the church after COVID. What's it look like? And that's why it's important. I would ask you in your prayers to keep not only David Reed, our bishop, but whoever becomes our next bishop, whether it's Rip Hardaway or the other David Reed or Alex Montes Vela, whoever wins this bishop election is going to be faced with this challenge from day one. I mean, this is their challenge. So they'll need our prayers because it's not easy. It's not an easy challenge to take on. So the church is in a struggling place kind of nationwide. St. Albans is faring much better than national trends and even diocesan trends, but there's no kind of answer coming from headquarters. One more thing on top of that, there is now a clergy shortage in the church. So here's what that, let me tell you why, and then let me tell you what it means. And those of you that are in business, you understand shortages, right? We have part shortages, we have labor shortages, we have all kinds of things. Well, guess what? The church is always a little slower than the outside kind of secular world to catch some of these things, but it's now affecting the church. And what happened was, in the years of the pandemic, mostly 2020 and 2021, our bishop, along with many other bishops around the church, decided it would be wise to stop sending people to seminary until they had a better grasp on what that would look like. Now, I don't say that with criticism. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the best decision, but I don't know that any of us would have made any different decision, because we were all making decisions during the pandemic that in hindsight we wouldn't do again, right? That was just life. So it's not fair to say, knowing what we know now, we wouldn't have done that. But a lot of bishops around the country stopped. And so what that means is seminary is a 3-year process for ordination. 2023 would have been the first year the 2020 class would come out, be ordained, and be placed as curates in churches. There are no curates coming, right? 2024 would be the second year. There's no curates coming that year. And so our kind of pipeline of clergy, like we've had at St. Albans, right, with Chris Cadell and Rod Clark, and more recently with Mother Kendra, there's nobody in that pipeline right now. So that's happening here, and that's happening around the church, and people are still retiring, right? Our own bishop is retiring. There's still retirements haven't stopped. So what that means for St. Albans is that there's no kind of assistant rector coming this year, right? There's no assistant rector coming maybe even next year. When I told the group that, I got to say, sometimes when you go through things, you know this, if you ever kind of talk through issues with people, sometimes you think, well, they might say this, they might respond that, they might respond this way. You think about ways people would respond. So when we told that in the financial group that we met with last week, talked through this issue, and the response was, oh my gosh, so we're stuck with just you? And I got to say, that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting a few other responses, but that was not the one I was expecting. But so I put it on my list of, unfortunately, yes, you're stuck with just me. But that means we're not having curates coming. There's no curates coming, at least for 2 more years. And Lord knows what that's going to look like in 2 years when they start graduating, what the demand will be around the church. Right? Because there's 4 or 5 churches now that could take one this year, but there's none to take. So in 5 years, will we make other decisions and settle into other patterns, or will there be 15 churches that need one in 2 to 3 years? I don't know, and that creates other issues. And in this diocese, we have some geographical things that work against us in Harlingen, because when they tell curates, there's 10 churches that are looking, right? Or 5 are in San Antonio and 5 are in the Valley. All of a sudden, they develop this huge love of the Alamo when they hear that, right? It's amazing how much they become fans of the Alamo and the Riverwalk when they know there's 2 options, San Antonio and the Valley. So all that being said, I don't know how that's going to shake out. And so we were faced with the decision, we either move the church forward in some way, or we stand still and wait and see what happens. So after a lot of conversation with the vestry, first they were like, no, we feel we need 2 clergy, explaining kind of the reality of the situation. We're going to go forward. I finally got them on board. I shouldn't say finally. They were just doing their due diligence. But we got on board with hiring a children's minister full-time instead of just doing nothing. Right? Because doing nothing isn't going to move the church forward. And children's ministry is an area that needs energy and leadership and organization. Just like Bennett's been able to help lift our youth ministry with consistency and leadership and organization, we're hoping that a children's minister would do the same. And so we started having conversations about that in October. I had a type of person in mind, and I want to give our head of school credit for this. We were having a conversation about this position, and I said, I would love somebody like, and I named a person, and she said, about a day went by, and she said, well, why not that person? And I said, well, I wouldn't want to take an employee from you, right? That's how it went down, right? I wouldn't want to take one of your employees. And she said, no, if this is what's best for the church and the school, we should look at this. So she gave me her blessing, and we're going to bring on at the end of the school year Miss Stephanie Valdez. A lot of you know Miss Stephanie from the school, and she's going to come on and be our full-time children's minister to bring some life and organization to our children's ministry. And with the blessing of the school, we're going to do that, and that's going to be a great new chapter for us as we can continue to move the church forward and bring some life there. So I want to just say how much I appreciate how much this community works together in that way, because I can't think of another church and school where that scenario would have played out like that, where there would have been an openness to say, how about this? If this is what's best for the whole community, let's talk about it. Even though it might mean I have to hire a new teacher, if it's best for the whole community, if it brings us all forward, let's look at it. So I'm thankful to Tracy for being willing to collaborate on that. And so Stephanie will start sometime, after the school year ends, and we'll be with an eye towards summer and especially fall, kind of getting some of our children's programs up and running and with some consistency, some energy. That's not to neglect that there's a lot of people who have been volunteering and doing it, and we are thankful for them. I mean, ministries need lots of volunteers, so we're still going to need that. But it'll be helpful to have a point person that can oversee some of those things and just bring consistent life and energy. And we have a lot of ideas for how we're going to grow that, and we hope those of you that have children or are interested, or find that an interesting idea might want to be part of that conversation of how we can grow that ministry for St. Albans. Certainly lots of opportunity there. So let me close with this. And I wanted to tell you about that. So one, you would hear it from me, and two, you would know why. I think it's important when we do a change of course that you can understand what the thinking that went into it in some of the scenarios. So it's not every sermon that I want to bring you through decision-making process, but I felt this one was important to bring you in on. And I want to end with a verse from Scripture. It's one of my favorites. One day when we are totally bored and in conversation, not from the pulpit, but we could tell you the story of all the setbacks we faced on my process of ordination, and how God opened door after door in the most unusual places that people said would be impossible to happen. And one of the verses that was near and dear to my heart during those times that I've kept with me is Romans 8:31. And Romans 8:31 is Paul responding to just a bunch of stuff that's going on in the church and challenges and why people don't hear the gospel. And then he says, well, what then should we say to all these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Right? If God is for us, who can be against us? And so despite everything we talked about at the beginning, about the trends and all that, I love looking at the year ahead. And I love the thought of our future. Because I know this. God is not neutral in what happens to his church. He's not indifferent. He's not neutral. He's not hands-off. God is invested in the future of St. Albans, because we're his church. Now, we don't get that by birthright, right? We don't just say because we're such exalted people. We get that because of his love and faithfulness to us and our love and faithfulness in response. But God has chosen St. Albans to be a church that lives. I believe that with my whole heart. I think we're seeing the beginning of it, and I think we're heading there in the future. When a lot of churches around us in the diocese are going to be struggling and looking for answers, I believe God's lifted us up to live and be a church that lives. If God is for us, who can be against us? So I look forward to the year ahead, not just the year ahead, but the years ahead, because God has called us to live. All of you are part of a community God has chosen to live and to be a light to others, to be a light to other churches in our diocese looking for ways to live, or other churches in our Episcopal church looking for ways to live. And that excites me to be a part of that. So I look forward to the next year and years together with you as we are a church that God has called to live. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.